There are moments in football that go beyond the scoreline, beyond the goals, the formations, the tactical dissertations that fill press conferences and pundit panels. Moments where you stop analyzing the game and start reckoning with something raw, something that strips the sport back to its most human core. Thursday night in Vancouver was one of those moments. And what happened at BC Place, in the stands, on the pitch, and in the tunnel long after the final whistle, deserves far more than a headline. Canada beat Qatar 6-0, their first ever World Cup victory, on home soil, in front of a crowd that had waited a lifetime to witness it. Jonathan David scored a hat-trick. The stadium shook. The red and white scarf flew. This should have been the purest night in Canadian football history. But by the time the teams walked off the pitch, the scoreline was almost irrelevant. Because something else happened that night, something that divided benches, ignited coaches, and sent shockwaves far beyond Group B. A young man's leg was broken, and what followed tested the character of everyone involved. Ismaël Koné, 24 years old, a midfielder of extraordinary talent and even more extraordinary heart, a player who had worn the Canada shirt 42 times and given everything, every sprint, every tackle, every late-night training session in cold Canadian winters, to make this World Cup moment a reality. He was 10 minutes into the second half when it happened. He played a simple pass to a teammate, the kind of pass you make 1,000 times without thinking. And then Qatar's Assim Madibo came in late. Very late. The kind of challenge that arrives after ball is already gone. The kind that carries with it not just weight but consequence. Koné went down immediately, and the reaction of everyone around him told you everything you needed to know about what they had just witnessed. Players stopped. Hands went to mouths. Canadian teammates sprinted from across the pitch to surround him, forming a protective ring of red jerseys around their fallen brother. The medical staff arrived with a stretcher. An air cast was placed around his lower left leg. And Koné, in a moment of grace that will define how people remember him from that night, raised his hand to wave to the crowd as he was carried off. He was in pain. Real pain. And still, he waved. Jesse Marsch, Canada's head coach, stood on the touchline and watched. In his post-match press conference, he would describe what he heard during that challenge with just 5 words. I could hear the bone snap. Let that sit with you for a moment. The head coach of a national team, on the biggest night in his country's football history, stood close enough to a challenge to hear his player's leg break. The clinical confirmation would come later, a broken left leg, a potential recovery of up to 12 months. For a tournament hosted on home soil, the timing is as cruel as football gets. Now, here's where the story takes a turn that demands examination, because what happened next did not reflect well on anyone standing in the opposing dugout. After Madibo's tackle, the referee showed a yellow card. VAR reviewed. The card was upgraded to red. Madibo, visibly distressed, and this matters because it matters who he was in that moment, was sent from the field. He knew. He understood what he had done, even if no malice drove the challenge. It was reckless, not vicious. That distinction is important. But here's what was not important. The reaction from Qatar's bench. While a young man lay on the turf in agony, while medical staff worked urgently around him, members of the Qatari backroom staff began arguing that the red card was unjust, arguing, in effect, that the expulsion of the player who had just broken a man's leg was somehow excessive. Canadian staff members had to be physically separated from their Qatari counterparts. The tunnel, which is supposed to be a space of transition and professionalism, became a scene of confrontation. Marsch, to his considerable credit, chose his words carefully when he addressed it. He said he did not fault Madibo personally, and that takes a kind of emotional discipline that deserves recognition. The player had, after all, walked into the Canadian dressing room after the final whistle and apologized directly to Koné. In a sport where accountability often dissolves beneath ego and institutional protection, that gesture meant something. Koné acknowledged it. The team acknowledged it. Marsch acknowledged it. That is what sportsmanship in its most difficult form looks like. But there's a difference between forgiving the player and understanding the bench. And Jesse Marsch was not prepared to do both. I don't understand the reaction from their entire bench to try to start a fight about it being a red card when a clear foul just happened that broke a player's leg, he said. Strange behavior. 2 words. delivered with the calm certainty of a man who had already decided that this was not worth extended commentary. Strange behavior. As an indictment, it is almost surgical in its precision. And then there was the handshake. Or rather, what passed for one? Marsch and Qatar head coach Julen Lopetegui, two experienced football men who know the conventions of the game better than most, met at the final whistle for the customary exchange. What the cameras captured was not a handshake. It was a collision of frustrations wearing the mask of a handshake. Lopetegui, visibly agitated, said something. Marsch! Threw his hands up and walked away. The body language told a story that no press conference transcript could adequately capture. And when reporters asked Marsch about it afterward, he responded with perhaps the most controlled rebuke available to a man under the media microscope. I'm not wasting a single second talking about that. He moved on, literally and figuratively. It has since emerged that Lopetegui's frustration stemmed, at least in part, from Canada pushing aggressively for a seventh goal deep in added time, with goalkeeper Maxime Crepeau spotted in the Qatar half as Canada continued to press. A 9-man team, in the final moments of a 6-0 defeat, and the argument was about sporting etiquette. Whether or not you agree with that grievance, the context in which it was raised, while Koné was being carried to hospital, makes it extraordinarily difficult to defend. FIFA has now launched a formal disciplinary investigation into the post-match scenes. The governing body is reviewing footage and match reports. Both federations could face financial sanctions. Individual players and officials may face suspensions. The machinery of football governance is moving, as it always does, in the aftermath of fire. Whether the consequences will match the weight of what happened remains to be seen. FIFA's relationship with accountability is, to put it generously, complicated. But there is something bigger here, something that outlasts the disciplinary committees and the fine print. This was Canada's night, their first World Cup win. Jonathan David scoring 3 goals on home soil in a tournament the country co-hosted, fought for, and believed in across decades of relative obscurity on the global football stage. That should be the story. And somewhere beneath the brawl and the broken bone and the hostile handshake, it still is. Nathan Saliba, who replaced Koné and scored Canada's 4th, lifted his teammate's jersey number in celebration. Not his own, Koné's. That is the image that should endure. That is what this team is made of. Koné himself was visited in hospital by his coach and his teammates before he went into surgery. Marsch, who has been accused of emotional distance in previous roles, made sure that no one in that squad felt alone that night. The team, for all the chaos around it, stayed together. In football, especially at a World Cup, that solidarity is not guaranteed. The pressure fractures the unprepared. But Canada showed something on that pitch and in that dressing room that no scoreline can fully express. There is a version of this night that exists without injury and without confrontation. In that version, Canada wins 6-0, David takes home the match ball, and the nation erupts in pure, uncomplicated joy. That version does not exist, but what exists instead, messy, painful, charged with emotion, may actually tell us more about who this Canadian team is and what they stand for. They celebrated, yes, but they also grieved. They competed without mercy, yes, but they also showed mercy where it mattered. They refused to be diminished by what happened to one of their own, and they refused to pretend that it did not matter. For Koné, the tournament is over before it truly began. The boy who waved to the crowd from a stretcher, who forgave the man who broke his leg, who has spent 4 years fighting for this jersey, he will watch the rest of this World Cup from a hospital bed and then from a rehabilitation room, working in silence toward a return that could take the better part of a year. Football is unsparing in that way. It asks everything, and sometimes what it takes cannot be given back quickly. But his story is not finished. It is barely a chapter into what it will become. And Canada's story, for all the turbulence of one extraordinary night, is still being written. If this kind of deep, analytical football storytelling speaks to you, if you believe the game deserves more than surface-level takes and hot-air punditry, then subscribe. Join this community. We cover the moments that matter, the stories beneath the stories, and the football that reminds you why you fell in love with this sport. In the first place, drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Qatar's bench behavior was indefensible? Was Lopetegui's frustration legitimate? And what does this Canadian team need to do now that Koné is gone? The world is watching. Canada, broken and brilliant, is still standing.